Purple Daily is daily Vikings entertainment.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3.
We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.
I will ride with this group.
Seriously, man. Please.
And away we go.
And it is time for Purple Access, which of course is part of the Purple Daily family, sponsored as everything we do is sponsored these days under the Purple Daily umbrella by our friends at Quick Trip. It is Judd, it is Chip Scoggins, Declan, as always at the controls. Ross Brendel is ordinarily at the controls actually for this show, but he is off this week. Chip Scoggins, Star Tribune sports columnist, good to have you along as always, my friend. And I want to start here. I want to start with Justin Jefferson's whirlwind tour of Media Row at the Super Bowl. I don't know what he's hawking, but he spent yesterday appearing on various shows. Now, I think some people were like, well, yeah, I mean, he's not saying, I mean, who cares? The Vikings are going to pay him. But I think it's worth sort of deconstructing his words here. Because there seems to be a preconceived notion that if Kirk Cousins is not back, that Justin Jefferson's not coming back, which I think is folly. And I mean, he has made it clear he would like Kirk back, to which I say, of course he is. What's he going to say? But I am reading from X, a quote by Justin Jefferson that Kevin Seifert retweeted. Okay. Jefferson said, among the things that he talked about on what would have been Wednesday, I want to break the bank as far as his contract negotiations go, and I want to be part of an organization that wants me and to really give me what I deserve. He also had said, I feel like eventually the Vikings will do what they need to do to have me in the building, but I don't really know at this very moment. Only time will tell. Now, here's my question off of this, because I do agree with his sentiment. And I think we all agree that Justin Jefferson almost certainly is going to be signed to a massive contract in the coming months by the team. That being said, do you think it now becomes at least a little bit of a story that until this contract gets done, they seem to be at some point in time last summer on the precipice of this contract being done, and it didn't get done? Because the teams and the players at that point always come out and say, hey, look, the season's starting. We'll revisit this when the season is done. It's a non-story. Move on. Okay, the season's done now. Contract's not done. We expect it to, but something stopped it from being done last summer. How much do you think that this has the ability to at least turn into a story worth paying attention to until there is some type of closure?
Well, I think you absolutely do, because we've seen things fall apart for whatever reason in these situations. And I think when you're talking about a contract that's going to be historic, there's always that possibility that it turns a little messier than teams would want. You know, I think we all thought, okay, because it's Justin Jefferson and his importance to the organization, this would get done. I fully expected we were going to show up to training camp last year and it'd have one of those first day of training camp press conferences. Here's Justin, here's this big publisher clearinghouse check that we're giving him. That's for old school. I don't know if anybody knows those anymore, but and so the longer it goes, and there's no, it hasn't been to the point where it's like, I'm not going to show up, or right. It's all been cordial, and everything that Kwesi said, we have great dialogue. We talk all the time. So I think they've done a good job of not bringing it into the public and making it a daily thing. Like, what's going on? Why is this not getting done? But here we are, Judd. We're into February and it hasn't been done yet. And so the longer it does go on, I think it's going to continue to be a story. And but it's going to get done. There's no doubt in my mind about that because of just his importance. But I just think because you're talking about setting the market and possibly making him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, that's not something that's a complicated contract. And I'm sure how they structure it and all that, it probably takes longer than all of us would like it to take.
Well, and I'm sure that there is some back and forth, if not quibbling, at least discussion about, like, okay, if you're going to exceed the Bosa contract, by how much? Yeah. So these are, I would say, uncharted waters as far as negotiations for the Vikings go on a non-quarterback when there is the outside chance that Kirk could come back. Now, personally, I don't know about that, but at least until that's done, that has to be considered a possibility too. So I do think that there are a lot of variables and moving parts here, that while Jefferson is probably the main focus, he's certainly not the only focus.
Well, and don't you think too? Typically, when you're talking about these contracts and even big ones like T.J. Hawkinson, don't you typically look like what other tight ends are making, and then that's where you start from? And
correct.
And I'm sure they're doing that here with the wide receiver and Tyreek Hill and say, okay, that's $30 million. But I don't think he's just wanting to be the highest paid wide receiver. No. I think he's wanting to be the highest paid quarterback. And so that adds a layer of complication to it. And so, but how that contract looks affects so many dominoes in the offseason. And so I think the sooner you can get that figured out and finalized, then the game plan can kind of fall in order a little bit, and kind of where you're at and how to proceed.
Okay, as we sit here in February, 8th today, Combine is at the end of the month. Obviously, free agency follows on the heels of the Combine. What are your odds today of Kirk Cousins being re-signed by the Vikings? Are they going up or down in your mind?
I don't think that it's really changed in my mind. I've said I still think there's a very strong possibility that they sign him to a 2-year deal and draft a quarterback in the second round or late first if they can get back in it. I don't know why I feel like that's the most logical thing that they'll choose. Because there's 3 different paths really that they can go down. I feel like that's the most logical one. So I don't think in my mind that it's changed any. What about you?
Well, here's my thing. I think in a perfect world from the Vikings end, that what you just said is the plan. Let's sign Kirk to a 2-year, almost at that point, a bridge contract, draft a quarterback, develop said QB, and then when Kirk leaves, bang, plug in JJ McCarthy or Penix or something. But here's the issue. Kirk's sort of media tour doesn't sound like Kirk is going to come like with a bridge type contract. And I just think at the end of the day, my question is this, and it's a very difficult question to answer because I don't know what the relationships are like in the building, but I think Kirk and Kirk's agent are going to say, he's recovered. He's going to be fine. We want full value on one last contract, probably preferably 3 years, perhaps 2, but we want to be paid and we want guarantees because they established that. I don't know the Vikings can afford to do that. And my last point is when I say I don't know what the relationships are like at TCO, I'm talking about, I don't think we have any idea. Forget the Wilfs, which are a major factor. I don't think, Chipper, we know right now what the working relationship, and I'm not trying to say it's bad, I don't know, is between Kwesi and Kevin. As far as like, is Kevin saying, we got to get Kirk back? And Kwesi saying, look at this, Kevin. No, we can't. Or is Kevin saying, I don't know about that? And, so like there's so many variables here. We will eventually learn because it eventually comes out, but we don't know this yet. And it goes back to like when Rick and Mike, Rick and Brad started together. We didn't know what that relationship was like.
Well, to me, you have 3. We'll call it the triangle of authority.
Exactly.
We'll coin it. But the Wills, Kwesi, and O'Connell. So if you set the triangle of authority, those 3 entities in a room, would they all have the same vision for what they need to do? I don't think so.
No, that's my exact point.
So who wins? I think the owners have to. It has to start with the owners because, these are such fundamental, foundational questions. When you're talking about quarterback and that kind of money, because forget the hometown discount. Whatever Cousins said is not about. It's always about the money and setting. You want guaranteed, and you want to be paid his value, what he thinks he is, and all the pressures that go in with those things. So this idea that he's going to take, some contract, a contract because he loves me, so forget it. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure O'Connell, he's trying to win now and give him the best chance to win. Kwesi has to think about now and the future and, rebuilding this roster. And the Wilfs are fans. Would they be on board with, paying that kind of money to Cousins or turn it over to a rookie? It would be fascinating to see if you had those three. And I assume those conversations happen, right? With just,
I hope so. They better happen.
Kind of where you sit down and say, what are we in this
Right.
snapshot right now? What are we? And have that conversation about who they are right now and how they need to proceed. And so, yeah, we don't know. I know the Wolves are fans. I know they love when they walk out of the locker room. You can tell when they won or lost by their body language and their faces.
Yep.
And so, but does that mean they're going to dictate to Kwesi, hey, man, we need to have Kirk back, and because we like being in the mix, or we think it's time to move on with another path and go with a younger quarterback.
And I completely agree with your sentiment, but I guess my question is this then. If the Wilfs are in that room and weighing in, and I don't know that for sure, but they certainly could be.
Well, they should be.
Right. But if they are weighing in to say we have to keep Kirk, I guess my question is, why did you hire Kwesi to a certain degree, but more importantly, O'Connell, who's a quarterback guy?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they're saying that. I'm just saying,
Right.
whatever direction they're telling them. And it might just be more, I mean, you would think that they would trust the GM that they hired to run it, but there is a philosophical approach about where you're at, what your objectives are, how do you see yourself? Because if, let's take Chicago, for example, that GM has to sell owners like, you know what, we're going to be bad. We're going through a major rebuild. We're going to do this. And the ownership has to say good.
Mm-hmm.
The Vikings aren't in that situation, but they're at an inflection point here, I think, right? Where you have to figure out
very much so. Very much.
How you get on the path where you think it's leading towards being a true contender. And that takes hard decisions, and it takes a philosophical approach and like them saying, this is what we believe we have to do to get there. And your ownership has to sign off on that.
Absolutely. But here's my thing too, is the more that I've been thinking about this in recent weeks. Okay. I think the Vikings are at an inflection point here that's actually favorable if it's done right. The Vikings lack a couple of things. One, especially on defense, impact players, because Hunter might come back. He might not. He's an impact player. Inside defensive line now.
Yeah.
Linebackers, Pace signing was good, but I mean, he wasn't drafted and he's a smaller guy. Like I'm talking impact guys. Okay. So they lack impact players on defense, and they lack depth because the 2022 draft kills you. You can't plug Booth in, you can't plug Scene in, you can't plug, it looks like Asamoah in. So with those two things, my feeling is this: you need to spend a year, not necessarily being terrible, but building things back up. You need to have another good draft. You need to, and then if you come out of this and Kirk's contract is not on the books, no dead cap is left on the books for 25, Chipper, that's another draft. And in March of 25, free agency gives you an opportunity to make some impact signings. So I think this is the perfect time. It's not to tell the Wilfs we're going to be terrible, but it's to tell the Wilfs we can hit a reset here that's going to be pretty impactful. And if we do this right, you're not going to have to wait. Like you're not taking the thing down to the studs by any means. And offensively, you are, if you replace Kirk offensively, you still have weapons.
Well, that's it. I mean, you look at what they've invested money-wise and what they're going to give Jefferson, Hawkinson, what they're going to give Darisaw. You spent a high draft pick on Addison. Brian O'Neill's a high-paid right tackle. So you've invested a lot of money in there. So you want to see that all that money maximized. So that might be part of the algorithm too. Is like, okay, what you have this unanswered question at quarterback. What gives you the best chance to maximize all this money investment that you put in there? But I agree with you on the defensive side. It's like that's a problem, like a big problem. And you have to say, what's the best way that we can fix our defense? Because, coaching alone cannot be the magic wand. And so they're going to have to replenish the talent pool on defense. And that means drafting smart, but using a lot of draft picks and on that side of the ball. So it's a tug of war. I bet there's a tug of war going on internally about, gosh, what do we do to, maximize what we have, we paid on offense right now and try to, still be relevant and in the division. I'm sure that says Cousins, but
right.
But I just don't know how you make it all work if you pay him that kind of money, and we're thinking $40 million, I think, is a starting point, right? I think it's probably
he ain't taking less than Daniel Jones, dude. And he probably shouldn't.
No, he's not. And then Jefferson and Darisaw, boy, it's I'm capologist, and Rob Brzezinski's great, and they can always figure it out. But man, this seems like a really complicated puzzle to try to figure out.
Yeah, and they can bring the cap hit on if they do, which as we just talked about, I think they will. The Jefferson contract, that cap hit for 2024 can actually come down. But the problem is you always have to pay the piper at some point. And the Kirk thing too is, unless Kirk, and I don't know why he would do the Vikings this favor, unless he extends the deadline on his dead cap hit that's already scheduled to go on the cap. I think it's $28+ million. Yeah. That's going to go on the cap on the first day of the league year. And anything he signs for here above and beyond that, which, he clearly will, will go on the cap as well. So you've got to get this done. Like with Kirk, you can't be, if Kirk hits free agency, I think it's done. But I think at some point in time, the Wilfs have to accept that there is a path here. Like you tried this and you know what? You made the playoffs a couple of times. You won one playoff game, but there is a path here. And if I am Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell privately, I'm thinking we're going into year 3 of 4-year contracts. Unless I get an extension, you're telling me that you're going to put pressure on me to win next year. And then, by the way, if I don't, it's easy to blow me out. I would much prefer a plan of, okay, here's when we're going to be really competitive again. And it's not going to be in 5 years. It's going to be in a couple years.
Well, that's the thing. Their contract situation is this is not just unlimited years that they get to try to figure
Those are short-term contracts, dude. 4 years.
And you're on year 3 coming off a bad year. And so that's the other thing. Do they say, would they get the assurance, if they don't bring back Kirk and they, a bridge or a rookie, will the Wolves say, will that buy them time? Or do they feel like, man, we better win, have a bounce back this year? And so what's the surest way to doing that? That's Cousins, right? And so, I don't, that's where you don't know the level of patience that the Wolves have in terms of, would they be willing to say, we're going to give you a little more runway here to figure this out, figure the defense out, because, they know what's going on with the 2022 draft class too. Also, they realize that's a strike against this regime in terms of their drafting. Yeah. So, but these things have to be, right here in front of their face and getting this thing resolved, because you can't keep punting this Jefferson thing down the road too much farther.
No, and on defense, you can't, Brian Flores worked miracles and deserves credit. But you know what? The defense started to get injured and picked apart. And I saw, tweets, the Flores defense don't look so good now. It's do you understand what he took and improved, by a lot? Yes, there are going to be some faults, but now OCs who play the Vikings are going to spend the offseason in dark rooms watching film and deconstructing. So you've got to help him personnel wise. And again, I think that's going to take a little bit of time.
I think we saw that at the end of last year. The last, what would you say?
Agreed.
5 weeks where
The
and
Bengals game.
I think O'Connell even said, something to the effect of these coordinators are good and they start to figure out your vulnerable spots.
Yep.
Those crossing routes that we saw and the middle of the field things and so I keep coming back to this, Judd, and you said it, high end talent. If you take away Daniil Hunter, name a high end talent or a foundational player on the defensive side. Like I go back to how it used to be, and I may have made this example before, where in the secondary, Xavier Rhodes, Harrison Smith, I'd say Trey Waynes, Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr, Everson Griffin.
Oh, no question.
You looked at those guys, you said, these are guys that 5 years from now, in the next 5 years, these are going to be your frontline starters. You're going to get high end. You're going to have some Pro Bowl players in there. Who do you look on this defense right now that started and say, for the next 5 years, this player is a foundational player who might reach Pro Bowl level?
Not yet.
I can't name one.
No. Like they could eventually show themselves, but right now, no. And Chipper, you go back to the teams that we covered together on the beat for the Star Tribune, 2009. Kevin and Pat.
Yeah.
You couldn't run against them. Jared Allen, Winfield,
Greenway.
Yeah, exactly. Like you had to what you're saying, you had foundational. If they weren't star players, they were damn good. And it's funny because Kevin Williams, in my opinion, was never properly appreciated. Like he was, I think what he did got lost in the shuffle at times. But what a marvelous 3 technique. And I always thought that he was a borderline Hall of Fame discussion guy.
For sure. Borderline. I don't know if he will ever get there, but he's for sure borderline.
He won't, I don't think. But I mean, you watched him and you're like, oh my God, this guy is special.
They had premier players, Jared, him, Winfield. I think Greenway was a Pro Bowl player, when he was in his best. And so that's not to say none of these guys can develop into that, but who are you betting on at this point? And so I think there's just so many. There's missed drafts by Spielman for sure.
Yes.
And the 2022 class to this date has been a miss. And so that's where the focus has to be.
Well,
even though there's bigger, sexier, more expensive questions that you have to answer on the offensive side, the defensive side needs all the care and attention right now.
You nailed it, man. As great as the Jefferson pick was, and as great as that Diggs trade turned out, really in a lot of ways for both sides. But I mean,
sure,
to have the luck of Justin falling to you, just like Moss did, to take him, and tragically Jeff Gladney died, but that second first round pick could have been Antoine Winfield Jr., who the Vikings watched all the time.
Yeah.
We watched all the time. And I don't remember anyone saying, he's not going to be that. He's too small. He ain't going to be that good. We're all like, this guy is the only thing that I thought that Winfield Jr., athletically gifted. The only thing I thought that he was better at, though, beyond his athletic gifts, was his football savvy, his football acumen. Instinct. Just like his dad was off the charts. Imagine if you take him, and I know at the time it's like, well, he's a safety. You don't need. He plays the slot corner. He plays safety. He could have played that Josh Metellus rover role. That, like to your point, that miss now, which was not a hindsight miss. We all were like, you probably should take him. Was huge.
Yeah, you mentioned his instincts. I mean, I covered pretty much all his games for the Gophers, and the number of game-changing plays and game-saving plays. He had like 5 of them in one season. Where
Fresno State game.
Yeah. Right? I mean, just, peels back and makes an incredible interception in the end zone. So, I mean, this is not just a Kwesi problem when you look at the roster and the lack of depth there. This is a previous regime problem that, it just has to be front and center this offseason and in this draft. And you can't do it all in one draft, right?
Right.
But it's something that's got to be addressed, and they've got to inject that side of the ball with a lot more talent.
Yeah, and how nice would it be a year from now to be also talking about, for the first time in a long time, being a big spender potentially, or a significant one in free agency, because that's when you can go out and get guys then who you can plug and play and who are going to make, to our point, they're going to make a difference as game changers, game wreckers.
Yeah, and because, so far in Kwesi's, short time here, he's been more of a 1 year into free agent. Let's give the guy a 1 year contract.
Yeah.
Almost kind of approve it. See if we, it would be nice for them to be back in that other situation where you identify a guy who's in that second contract, still prime.
Oh yeah.
That you can give a big deal, come in, okay, for next 5 years, this guy is going to be this for us.
Yep. For all his faults, when Childress got the job, and the Wilfs had bought the team, I think they signed the agreement in like May of 2005. Ticey coached that year, but then, McCombs had been so cheap. If you recall, that first free agency period, they made a lot of good signings. They made a lot of really savvy, smart, Chester Taylor was brought in, Hutchinson was brought in, Lieber was brought in, Longwell. Like they solidified a lot of things. And the fact is, you certainly can't do that on a yearly basis, but it would be nice for the Vikings to free themselves up financially enough to have at least the ability to have another like splash of guys come in who that you can build potentially a championship team around.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you think about like the impact that Steve Hutchinson made on that offensive line. I mean, that line was, we talk so much about the line now, but I was thinking about this because I heard the thing with Bryant McKinney yesterday. I was thinking about, man, that line was good. That offensive line with Hutch and McKinney and Berg / John Sullivan and Anthony Herrera, Lode Holt. Man, that was a good offensive line.
Well, and Hutch forever changed my opinion of guards because one, he's a freaking Hall of Fame player, but two, he came in and it was my opinion that his presence got a lot more out of Bryant than Bryant did.
Yeah. Well, Bryant was always
and Bryant was talented.
Just physically gifted, like his size and ability. There's always the motor part, but when you put him next to Hutchinson, that was a pretty good tandem there, man. You
didn't mess around with Hutch.
No.
Like he was taking no grief from anybody. And if you didn't take your job seriously, he might rip your head off.
That's right.
So, and I appreciated that. Like that was cool to watch.
You tiptoed around Hutch. That's right.
Yeah, you're like, hey, Steve, how are you? Give me a cup of coffee. All right, dude, great stuff. Talk to you in a couple Thursdays. See you, Chipper.
See you, brother.